Well, hello. Welcome back to the Awakening Hope Ministries live stream. We have a great topic tonight that I'm so excited to tell you about because it's something that I didn't learn growing up. I didn't hear about this kind of stuff until just a few years ago. And I'll just be honest with you. When I started to learn these things, I actually started to struggle with a little bit of anger towards a lot of different churches because there are people that know these things. There's scholars that know these things and they don't share them with people. And then people like you and me will read our Bibles and say, you know what, some of this just doesn't make sense. And we're forced, without having PhDs in Greek and Hebrew, sometimes to just say, I just don't know what it means. So I'm just going to trust what I've been told, what I've been taught. And I'm definitely not trying to throw pastors under the bus. I'm just saying that for me, I had to get over that for a minute because it's not that I felt lied to, but I definitely felt like they were keeping stuff from the people in the congregations that shouldn't be scary at all. I don't know why some people that know these things won't share them, because to me, I read them and this is not some weird stuff that somebody just made up. It's right there in the scripture the whole time. So after several years of diving in and learning these things, I'm excited to share with you something I wish people had shared with me a long time ago. So tonight we're going to talk about what is this business with the term Elohim. Is this really a name of God? Because it's definitely in some of our worship songs. It's definitely in different books about the names of God. You see all the different names and Elohim is in there. But is it the name of God? Or is it a type of being that God just happens to be? What is this? What is the deal with Elohim? And I'm excited to dive into that. Obviously, this can go a lot of different directions, so we're going to try and stay focused on what does it mean, the term Elohim? What does it mean? Is this describing a name of God, or is it describing a type of being he is? So before we dive in, I just want to say we are getting ready to go to Brazil. We're doing 2 crusades, and I would love it if you joined us. If you want more information, we're going once in March for 1 week and going at the end of March for the first 2 weeks of April for 2 different crusades, and I would love it if you joined us. That way, instead of hearing the stories from a missionary or an evangelist that comes to your church, you could actually have the opportunity to experience it and see the Lord doing things like that through you. So just come and join us. We're not worried about you not seeing that it's real, because it is real. It's not a horse and pony show. The power of God is still real, just as much as it was back in the Bible times. And I want you to see what happens when you take a step of faith, to step out and see the power of God move through you. You might say, well, I could do that here. Absolutely you could. But the cool thing about going to Brazil or something like that is you're so far out of your comfort zone, and you've got us pushing you, trying to help you get out of that comfort zone so you can experience the Lord. I just want to encourage you to pray about this and decide quickly, because we are going to close the applications in about a week. So with that being said, if you don't want to come or you can't come, would you consider supporting us to send us to go? Because we got to raise the money for the crusade and the money to go. And I would really appreciate it if you would take the time to either click the link in the chat to go to awakeninghopeministries.com, and you can hit the donate button there, or you can just follow the link that's in the chat, whichever one works better for you. Would you send us? Would you help send us to the nations to do what God has called us to do, to reach people for Jesus? Okay, let's dive into this. Back to the subject, Elohim. So where does Elohim show up? In order to find out the answer to our questions, we do need to start looking at, where does this name Elohim start to show up in the Bible? Now, again, I'm not going to get weird on you. I'm just going to show you the facts of where it shows up, and you can come to your own conclusions. So let's start with the very obvious. In the beginning, Genesis chapter 1. I want you to see that obviously I inserted Elohim because that is the Hebrew word that is there. Now, we translate the word Elohim God, and most of the time in the Bible, you're going to see that with a capital G, because it means God. It means Yahweh, Jehovah, the God that you and I worship. And the problem is that Elohim is not always used to describe that God. Now watch. You can see that several times in just the first 5 verses, the word for God is translated Elohim. And it's many, many more times after this. I just did not feel like you needed more than this to see that clearly this term Elohim is used of the God that you and I worship. Now, here's the interesting thing about this word is it can mean singular. It can also mean plural, which means you have to understand the context to know which one that word means in that moment. Typically, or normally, I should say, it is describing God. It's describing singular, our God, the God that we know. Now, let's go on. Now, just so you know, it's about to get really complicated because what you've probably learned in Sunday school or Bible studies is that that is the beginning and the end of the word Elohim. But guess what? It's about to get a little more complicated than that. In Psalm 82, we see God in verse 1, Elohim. Now, you'll notice I put God in blue, and anytime it's referring to the God that we worship, Jehovah, Yahweh, I put in blue just so you can understand there are other times it's referring to someone else. So in Psalm 82, it says God, again in Hebrew, that's the word Elohim, has taken his place in the divine council. Now, there's a few people that try to interpret this saying that this is referring to human beings. Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think that a divine council would refer to human beings on the earth, especially in the Old Testament. I don't think so. That's hard for me to believe, especially because as you keep reading, watch what it says. In the midst of the gods, Elohim, he holds judgment. So now what we have is we have Elohim clearly being used of God, our God, Yahweh. But then that same word is used of these other divine beings that are part of this divine council, and the same word is used, Elohim. So that's going to raise some immediate questions. Don't worry, we're going to get through this. Now, watch what God says as God, Yahweh, comes and sits and takes his place in the divine council, and he begins to speak to these other Elohim present. He says in verse 2, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods." So he's again speaking to them, "sons of the Most High." We're going to go over that term in a little bit. "All of you, nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, Elohim, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations." So clearly what you can see in this setting here in Psalm 82 is that God, Yahweh, has come and sat amongst a divine council with divine beings. This is not human beings. And we're going to prove that over and over and over. And many believers are scared to death of this language, and we're going to talk about more why that is in a little bit. But I want you to get the picture here. Clearly, God had put these other Elohim, these other members of the divine council, in charge of something. Now, in a different broadcast, we're going to talk about what that is, because they were given charge over the nations. And what you're going to discover is that they were not ruling and leading people to God. They were wanting to be worshiped themselves. So they were walking around in darkness. They were being misled, led astray by these sons of the Most High, or these sons of God, or these Elohim. All those terms fit to the same group of people. Now, what's interesting here is that he then begins to pronounce judgment on them. He says, "I said you're gods," meaning you're an eternal being. You don't live and die like a human being, but nevertheless, you're going to die like men. And that's the judgment that God pronounces upon these beings. This is so important because as God is pronouncing judgment upon these beings, and he says you will die like men, it's once again proof that these are not human beings. These are divine beings. I've heard many arguments that there's different ways to look at this, and there really isn't. This is the only way that I find that makes absolute sense because it's right there. It's so clear if you just let it say what it says and let it mean what it means. And what you're going to discover is that this language of God being the Most High God, it means what it says and it says what it means. He's the Most High. He's an Elohim. They are Elohim, but he's above them. Now, we're going to make that case more in just a moment because you're going to naturally have some questions that raise up. But I want to show you another place in Psalm 89. So are there many gods? And is this polytheism? Is it like Greek mythology where you got Zeus and you got Thor and you got all these other gods and a bunch of them are kind of equal, but you got a pecking order going? Is that what's happening? The answer is no. That is not what's happening. But look what happens in Psalm 89. Let the heavens praise your wonder, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of holy ones. That's interesting because, once again, that could and probably does include the divine council from Psalm 82, but it's also including maybe the rest of the beings in heaven. We don't know. It just says the assembly of holy ones. I'm led to believe it's more than just the divine council. For verse 6, for who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? O God, greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones. Now, before we continue to read that, I want you to understand that clearly the Bible is saying is that Yahweh is unique. He has attributes that they don't have. He is an Elohim. They are Elohim. And we translate that as God, and we're going to break this down in a moment. But what I want you to see is that there is clear definition here that none of these other Elohim even come close to comparing to our God, to Yahweh. They don't even come close. The Bible says right here, who amongst the heavenly beings is like you, O God, greatly to be feared in the council of holy ones. So he's clearly not talking about, oh God, you're amongst all these human beings and you are not like them. Of course that's true, but that's not what this is talking about. This is clearly talking about heavenly beings, the heavenly host, the heavenly council, probably the divine council from Psalm 82, and God is above them. He is not like them, even though he's also an Elohim. It continues on to say, and awesome above all who are around him. There is no mistake here that God, Yahweh, is above them in every single way. It's no mistake that God created them and they are underneath him, but they are Elohim. The Bible is not making a mistake here. We didn't translate that long. That's not some strange interpretation. That is literally what it says in the Hebrew, that these other beings are Elohim. O Lord God of hosts, who is mighty as you, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you. So who are these sons of God, or this divine council, this assembly of holy ones that we see talked about here? Because these types of beings, are they just angels? Is that what we would call angels? What's going on here? Or are these the beings that fell and became demons? Well, I am excited over the next few weeks to start sorting a bunch of that out with you right here live. So we're going to dive in here for just a moment. We're going to pause the discussion there on what's going on there. And I want to show you something interesting about these other beings in heaven that are referred to as Elohim. In Job 38, God is obviously speaking to Job here and rebuking him a little bit. And he says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God, there's our word Elohim again, shouted for joy. Now, what's interesting before we move on from this is what that does is the morning stars of God is another way of talking about these angelic beings, these Elohim, these sons of God, the sons of the Most High, the divine council. It's all terms for the same types of being. Now, what we need to understand with this is this puts them at creation, witnessing creation forming as they watch God create the earth and the stars and the planets, and they're rejoicing. They're seeing that what God is creating is good, and they're rejoicing with God as they watch him create all these things. They're dancing for joy. And God is challenging Job. Where were you when that happened, boy? Who do you think you are? Did you hang earth up by itself? Did you lay its foundations? You weren't there. Where were you when all the stars of God were shouting for joy, the sons of God? That's an interesting way to look at it, because it proves that these beings were there at creation. Next, in Job chapter 1, they show up again. Now, there was a day when the sons of God, and again, that word God there is Elohim. So the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." Now, I just want to say that for a lot of people, they read this, and especially in Bibles, the word Satan has a capital S. And what we are led to believe in that moment is that this is the devil. This is the devil showing up to have a conversation with God. And I'm not saying that the devil couldn't do that. He couldn't show up in the courtroom of God and be the accuser. What I am saying is that's probably not what's happening here. And here's why. Because as it talks about these sons of God, these Elohim that were coming before God, the divine council, whatever they were Elohim. They were spiritual beings. And as they come to talk before the Lord, it says, and the Satan. Now, Hebrew is similar to English in the sense that it doesn't tolerate the definite article before a proper name. For instance, my name is Dean, not the Dean. Your name is whatever your name is. It's not the whatever your name is. And the Hebrew doesn't tolerate that either. The Hebrew doesn't allow a definite article before a person's name. And that's the first clue to understand that this is not the Satan that you and I are familiar with. This is just the accuser. And the accuser, obviously, the devil eventually, when you get into the Second Temple period and the New Testament, the devil ends up being called Satan. But at this point in history, there's very little proof that they even called him Satan. So he's called many things. And then when you get to the New Testament, they kind of decide, yeah, this is what we're going to call this guy. He's the devil. He's Satan. He's the serpent. He's the snake. He's all these different things. But what Job is talking about, you might hate me for this, but I'm being honest with you. It's not Satan that's coming and presenting himself before God. Instead, it's more likely that the accuser is one of or many of these sons of God that are in verse 6 coming to present themselves before the Lord. Now, we could talk about this at greater length at a different time to further convince you, but what I want you to see is there's a relationship between these sons of God, these Elohim, and God himself. Now, as we continue to read in Genesis chapter 6, this is probably where the sons of God are the most famous, especially in the Old Testament. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God, again there's Elohim, came in the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Now, we'll go into greater detail on that in a few weeks, hopefully, but I just want you to see that these Elohim keep showing up all over the Old Testament. They're going to show up in the New Testament. But watch in Deuteronomy, they stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods, Elohim, they had never known. And what we see here is clearly The Bible is telling us that the Israelites, or the people, this is actually speaking back to the Tower of Babel, the people were misled. They were given over to this divine council that was ruling. God gave them charge of different nations, and he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. We'll break that down later, but I want you to see here that what they began to worship was not just a piece of wood or a piece of gold fashioned into some demonic-looking figure idol thing. What they were worshiping were these other Elohim that were behind these idols. Many of you know that a lot of the ancient idols, the mouth is open, and that's because they would actually have ceremonies where they believed, just like it says in Hebrew, and I believe it's also true in Greek, that the word for spirit and breath are the same word. In Hebrew, it's ruach. And they believed not that the piece of gold was God, but they believed that a God would come in through the breath and inhabit the idol. That's why someone like Gideon could tear down a bunch of idols, and the people didn't think, oh no, our gods are dead. They would just build new ones to the same gods, because they knew that their God wasn't dead. It would just, its encasement, what it inhabited according to their belief, no longer was capable of having it because it was broken. Now, what this begins to show is not only were these sons of God present at creation, not only did they go to and fro amongst the earth, not only are they desiring to be worshiped, but you're going to discover that by the time you get to the New Testament, these guys are the principalities that Paul is talking about in the book of Ephesians. They're also the same characters that end up coming out in the book of Daniel, the prince of Greece, the prince of Persia. But we'll talk about that again at a later date. So is Elohim, the word, is that used anywhere else? Because so far we got two spots. We know it's used of God. We also know that it's used of these other spiritual beings. Well, I've got good news. It does appear somewhere else. Many of you are familiar with the story of King Saul going to see the witch, and he wants to conjure up the spirit of Samuel because he needs some advice. It says in verse 11 of chapter 13, then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God. And that word again is Elohim, coming up out of the earth. He said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he's wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Now, I didn't put the verses on here. You can look it up later in 1 Samuel. I think it's chapter 17, the story of David and Goliath. What you'll notice is that Goliath begins to curse David by his gods, or his Elohim, meaning Goliath even believed that his gods were spiritual beings, these Elohim. And so when he said, I curse you by my gods, or by my Elohim, that's exactly what he's doing. And that's why when David responds saying, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord, David understood there was more going on here than just a young boy facing a great big giant, that this was a battle of whose God was bigger. He understood this. And so let's keep reading, because this is going to get even more fascinating. I want to go over some terminology just to give you, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, I learned a lot of this from probably my favorite, not probably, he is my favorite scholar and theologian, Michael Heiser. And he broke this down for me in a way that just made my brain explode. So in Hebrew, the word malach, or malach, means messenger. Now, if the messenger being talked about in that particular verse is a spiritual being, then it's translated angel. But if it's a human being, it's translated messenger. Now, what we have done, and I can share the history with you a different time, is that we have just decided that a spiritual being is an angel. And the reason that's not correct, it's not completely correct, is You're using a job description to describe what something is. The reason this is important is because you get to Greek and the word for messenger is angelos or angeloi, and it just means messenger. That'd be like you calling human beings plumbers instead of human beings. So you are a human and you might be a plumber. Well, these angels are not, angel is not the proper term to describe what they are. It is the proper term to describe what they do. And not all of them are described that way. That's why you read even in the New Testament that it says the heavenly hosts. It doesn't just say, hey, a bunch of angels, even though there can be a bunch of angels. Even in the Old Testament, you can see that. The hosts of heaven, all these different terminology, they mean something. Now, I'm not going to crucify someone for calling all these spiritual beings that are good angels and all the bad ones demons. I'm just saying it's not completely correct to what the Bible teaches. Because again, you're using a job description to describe what something is. Now, both these statements are job descriptions. They're not stating what something is by nature. And sons of God is terminology that's also used for heavenly beings. It's used for these shining beings, these spiritual beings that are more powerful than a human being. Sometimes they come looking like a human. Sometimes they come glowing in glory. There's all kinds of different ways they decide to reveal themselves. But in the Old Testament, sons of God was not used for human beings. Sons of God was used for spiritual beings like the divine council or these beings that are in heaven. So let's continue on. Elohim does not mean a certain set of attributes such as omniscience, omnipresence, all-powerful, sovereign, etc. God, Yahweh, is an Elohim, but he is not like the others. He created them. They may be more powerful than humans, but they're not equal to God. Now, I really want to harp on this because this is where you start to draw the line between polytheism and what the Bible is actually teaching. When you see the word God in the Bible, you immediately are thinking, oh, he's omniscient, he's omnipresent, he's eternal, he's all these things. You're ascribing attributes to that three-letter word, God. So when you see a little G-O-D, we are trained in our culture to think, oh, that's a false God. He's none of those things. He's not, because there's only one real God. There's only one true God. And that's true, just not in the way you think it's true. And here's what I mean by that. When you understand that these Elohim, these angelic beings, they are called Elohim. And that is translated God. So when the Bible says he is the God above every God, it means what it says. It says what it means. When it says he's the most high God, it means what it says, and it says what it means. Don't try to change it. But here's the thing. The word God, Elohim, does not come with all the attributes that Yahweh carries. Just because someone is an Elohim, an angelic being, a spiritual being is an Elohim, does not mean that they're the same as God in all of his attributes. They're not omnipresent. They're not omniscient. They're not all these different things. They might be more powerful than humans, but they're nowhere near as powerful as God. Now, the thing that we have to wrap our brains around is that they are called gods. That's what it says. But it's not polytheism because they're not the same as our God. Our God, according to Psalm 89, is above them. There's none other like him. He is the most high God. He's above all of them. But what it does reveal to us is that before God created the earth with people on it, God had a heavenly family, and still does, obviously. And he has these other heavenly beings, these Elohim, and it appears to be that there's rankings and job descriptions and different things going on. There's probably even different creatures. I think we're going to get to heaven and be surprised just how big it is, because God didn't start being creative when he created the earth. He's been creative for all eternity. So when God created them, and however much time they existed before he created the earth, obviously the Bible doesn't tell us, so I'm not even going to guess, but God created the earth and they were present. And at some point, they were given authority over the nations. They decided they wanted to be worshiped, so God began to punish them. Now, these beings, again, became the principalities. Now, when we talk more about spiritual warfare, we're going to dive into that a little more, because it's really important that you understand the difference between the principalities and the demonic forces here on earth, because there is a difference. Now, not everything comes across super clear in English, obviously, because if it did, we would have seen this a long time ago. But unfortunately, people are so afraid to talk about these things because what they're afraid of is that you're going to hear polytheism, that there's many of the same God and they're all equal and they're all duking it out. No, there's just a bunch of Elohim, and not all of them have the same attributes as each other, and none of them have the attributes that Yahweh has. None of them. Because he is above them in every way, shape, and form. Every single way. Now, I want you to understand that how this begins to impact when you reread the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is you're going to start to see the storyline that has been there, and many people over hundreds of years have tried to strip away the supernatural interpretation that the authors believed when they were writing the Bible, obviously under inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And we need to be willing to challenge some of our Western traditions that might be well-meaning, but they're not fully accurate. Because when you understand how this works, you're going to start to see how much more sense a lot of things in the Bible actually make, not less sense. For instance, the sons of God in Genesis 6, many people try to talk about this being the line of Seth marrying people that aren't in the line of Seth, and this is why it was evil. I don't think so, because that doesn't make sense with what Peter's talking about, with what Jude is talking about, or many other places in the Bible. What you need to understand is that these other Elohim, they are, a lot of them turned against God, and they're bad guys, and they became principalities. Some of them left heaven and found women and took them to be their wives and slept with them and created the race of the Nephilim. And that's some fun stuff to talk about. It's not scary stuff to talk about. It's actually really fun to talk about, because it'll bring a lot of the Bible to life. If you begin to strip the supernatural away, then none of the things we talked about make sense. Who's the divine council? Who is God sitting amongst in Psalm 82? If it wasn't heavenly beings and it was just people, that makes no sense, because then why would they die like men when they were already going to die like men? Because that's what people do. They die like men. I want you to be set free from any mindset that could hold you back from understanding the Bible at a new level, at a deeper level, where you can look at it. For instance, we didn't pull out some strange, and again, I'm not against the prophetic. I believe that God has gifted me prophetically. What I'm against is strange prophetic people that come out with these strange visions and strange words that they state as fact with nothing to back them up. That's not what we did today. All we did today was showed you literally what the Bible says, and the words in Hebrew and Greek that they translate into English, what those words are that they chose. So I want to remind you one more time that the term Elohim, they used obviously for Samuel as a disembodied spirit. I don't know if that was just the witch thinking, whoa, it looks like a god coming up, because clearly she's conjured up demonic spirits, and none of them looked like Samuel, who probably had some kind of glory because she was scared out of her mind when Samuel started to come back. And that's an interesting discussion maybe for a different day, but she used the word Elohim. And if that's true, then that means that a disembodied spirit that looked glorious to her looked like what they believed a son of God or son of Elohim would look like. And what I'm just trying to say to you is that in their minds, these Elohim were glorious beings. They were magnificent beings. Sometimes they glowed when they appeared. Sometimes they appeared just as human beings, and you didn't even know they were supernatural beings. But either way, they were supernatural, and they were the sons of God. And guess what? When you get to the New Testament, God turns the tables and says that you and I will judge angels someday. And he says, now you and I are the sons of God. That's a fun story. Once again, we're going to save that for a different day. I promised you there was a bunch of rabbit trails that we could go on with this. We're just not going to do it today. What I want you to really do is, if you don't believe me, go look it up yourself. You can go online. You can invest in some Bible study software. You can also buy a Strong's Concordance and reference all of it together to see that from every angle, the word that is used in all the places I just showed you is that word Elohim. And what we must understand is that this word God or Elohim does not mean a certain set of attributes. It means that that is a spiritual being, something created before this earth was, whatever those beings are that are called Elohim. God is an Elohim, but he's not like any of them. None of them are like him. He's far above them. So this is not a battle of gods that are equal. This is a battle of the one true God, the most high God, who's destroying all these puny Elohim who think they're big stuff. So next time we come, we're going to talk more, hopefully, about this topic. I've got so much I want to tell you that I'm trying to pick and choose what it is we talk about from week to week. Please make sure that whether you're watching YouTube or Facebook, would you hit that like, follow, and subscribe buttons? That would be fantastic. And once again, if you like what you see, we do many other things, not just these live broadcasts. We minister, we do deliverance, we do crusades and events. You can book us to come to your church if you want. But I'm asking you, would you pray about supporting us? Would you go to awakeninghopeministries.com and hit the donate button? We would really appreciate your help in sending us and empowering us to do more things like this, as well as going to the nations to reach people for Jesus. So don't forget to like, follow, share, subscribe, all those things. We would really appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And until we see you again, God bless you, and I hope you have a great night.